The IRS slashing its workforce nearly 7.5% Thursday night. A total of 6,700 employees were laid off as part of the White House's efforts to find and eliminate government waste. The agency has long been a target of Republicans in Congress and has been under renewed scrutiny since it received an $80 billion funding boost in the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act. All of this comes as tax season is in full swing. For the latest, we're bringing in the Hill's White House columnist, Niall Stanage. Niall, thanks for joining us. Let's start off with the basics here. What do we know about the thousands of workers who were fired? Were they targeted? Was this at random? I mean, what do we know?
What we know is that most of these workers, if not all of them, were so-called probationary employees, so approximately a year or less of service. It does seem to be across most of the areas of the IRS. Compliance has been mentioned, but of course that's a huge range of what the IRS actually does, and so those are the people that we think are being targeted.
And what does this mean for the millions of 2024 tax returns that are already in the process of being filed? I mean, are those going to be impacted by this?
Well, that's the big question. We don't have an absolutely definitive answer yet. But what we do know is that workers at the IRS who were going to be working on those tax returns were told at an earlier stage when the government buyout or the federal worker buyout was offered that they couldn't take it. And the assumption was that they couldn't take it because obviously they would be needed in tax season. Now, the thing we are still lacking clarity on is were any of the people in that category then laid off or fired as a consequence of these cuts. We don't know that for sure. It wouldn't seem to make logical sense, but that of course is the danger, that the IRS has a staffing shortfall when it is in most demand.
Yeah, that would not be good for all the people expecting their tax returns to come up soon. But in the meantime, the DoD is also preparing for cuts, right? We know Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth ordered the Pentagon to plan for 8% cuts from the defense budget in each of the next 5 years. So are these cuts also going to be impacting personnel? And also, how is Congress responding to this?
So they are going to be impacting personnel. I mean, you can't really make cuts on that scale unless you're also cutting workers from the workforce. Obviously, the Pentagon is an absolutely huge agency. It is notable, I think, that some Democrats have expressed some concern about these cuts. Republicans broadly so far have been either supportive or silent. But it is interesting, the GOP is generally speaking more identified with military issues, and I wonder will we hear more dissenting voices raised as time goes on. The other point is that there are a lot of lawmakers for whom bases in their districts or other military facilities in their districts are an important economic engine, and we have to see what they think of that.
Yeah, down the line, that will be interesting, as you said, since it's over the next 5 years. But I want to shift gears here to the war in Ukraine. Trump's special envoy to Ukraine and Russia broke with the president with his recent rhetoric on the war. Trump has repeatedly blamed Zelensky, and this week saying he should have started peace talks sooner. He even said that Ukraine started the war. Take a listen to what he said.
And I think I have the power to end this war, and I think it's going very well. But today I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal.
And now Trump's special envoy, Keith Kellogg, is calling Ukrainian President Zelensky a courageous leader. So do you think this is a sign that not everyone in the Trump administration is on board with the president's stance, or is this just negotiators trying to play both sides here?
To a certain extent, I think it is negotiators trying to play both sides, but there are very genuine differences within the Republican Party over Ukraine, and we've seen that in the past few days. Some Republican senators have been quite critical of Trump's rhetoric, the idea of blaming Ukraine in effect for starting a war when Russia invaded Ukraine has caused, I think, particular heartburn among some Republicans. Even within the administration, Bianca, there are people with very different worldviews. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, would be from a more traditionally hawkish kind of Republican view than a Tulsi Gabbard, for example.
Yeah, definitely. Now with his new cabinet, it will be interesting to see how they move forward with Ukraine and Russia. But in terms of other international conflicts, on Thursday, Israel received the bodies of 4 hostages that Hamas said were killed in Israeli airstrikes. 3 of those bodies were identified by Israeli authorities as who they were meant to be, including the 2 young boys that were killed. but the fourth body that was supposed to belong to the boy's mother, Shiri Bibas, did not match her records. And Israeli authorities called it a random body, demanded that Hamas return Shiri's remains. So I'm wondering, I mean, first of all, how is this being handled from here on out? And do you see this as having an impact on the ceasefire?
Well, the ceasefire is obviously very fragile, and it has been throughout its existence, because you have an enormous amount of distrust on both sides. Now, if it is in fact the case that this is not the body of the hostage, obviously that will lead to an increase in that distrust. Hamas, for what it's worth, say that they're looking into it and it may have been a mistake, and it may be the case that this woman was killed in an airstrike that killed lots of people, and there's some genuine or sincere mix-up about the bodies. But obviously it causes even greater enmity and tension to the ceasefire.
Yeah, it feels like could definitely complicate things depending on how it's handled on both sides. White House columnist Niall Stanage, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
A federal judge has allowed President Trump's mass firings of federal workers to move forward. With what that means for hundreds of thousands of government employees, the Hill's courts and legal reporter Zach Schonfeld joins us now. Zach, President Trump received the go-ahead for these mass layoffs after a judge ruled in favor of the Trump administration and told unions that they need to bring their challenge before the Federal Labor Relations Authority. So, is this game over for those employees? I mean, what can we expect to happen from here?
Hey, Bianca, it does seem that it's game over in this lawsuit, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily the end of the road. Yes, right now, the Trump administration does have the go-ahead. They can continue moving ahead with these plans for mass layoffs in government speak. It's known as a reduction in force, but there are other cases that have been proceeding through the courts as well. Now, those efforts so far have also failed. There is no court order currently in place blocking either those mass reductions in force or also the new administration's buyout offer for federal employees. But we're continuing to see this patchwork of cases make their way through the courts, so it is possible that we could see some appeals in the future and that things will be blocked in the future. But as of right now, the Trump administration is moving ahead.
Well, another judge ruled that the Trump administration violated a court order that paused a freeze on foreign aid, but no one is being held in contempt for it. So can you explain exactly what's going on with that one?
Yeah, this is now one of multiple cases that is pushing back on what has been the Trump administration's aim to effectively dismantle USAID and foreign aid that the United States government gives out across the globe. So there are now multiple lawsuits challenging this, and some of those lawsuits we've seen judges come in and issue these temporary rulings that simply seek to preserve the status quo, that prevent the administration from moving forward with some of these pretty rapid and drastic efforts to effectively dismantle the agency. But what we saw in this case is after one of those temporary rulings was issued, the plaintiffs came back to the judge and said that the administration was not complying. They were citing aid and grants that they said were still being frozen and trying to hold the administration here in contempt of court, saying that they weren't complying with the judge's ruling. So the judge said that, yes, the administration was not complying. They need to open up these grants, but he did not go as far to actually hold them in civil contempt, which could have carried penalties. And the administration has been insisting in court that they are working on trying to comply with these orders.
All right, I want to move to some big news out of New York here. The judge overseeing New York City Mayor Eric Adams' criminal case adjourned the trial today as he considers a very controversial effort by Trump's Justice Department to drop the case. So what did we learn from the judge's new order?
Yeah, we've been waiting on this judge's order after he held a hearing earlier this week where he heard from both Adams' lawyer as well as acting Deputy Attorney General Emil Bove in their push to end Eric Adams' criminal case, a very controversial move that has sparked the resignations of multiple prosecutors at the Justice Department. So now in this order, it was the first time we got an update from the judge following that hearing. And in short, he's putting the schedule on hold until he resolves this matter. So this trial was originally scheduled for April. That has now been adjourned indefinitely. And now the judge is going to continue hearing more arguments about what his authority is and whether he can override the government's desire to drop this case. So he's now not only going to hear from the DOJ and Adams' attorney, but also in this order, the judge has appointed a lawyer by the name of Paul Clement, who is a very prominent conservative attorney. He's going to take the other side and in the coming weeks submit briefs arguing about why this case should not be dismissed. So in short, no ruling yet, but this is going to continue to play out over the next few weeks.
It'll be interesting to see what happens. But in some other court news, the Supreme Court sided with Hungary against a group of Holocaust survivors who say they're entitled to compensation. So why was the Supreme Court involved in this, and what more can you tell us about this specific case?
The court here is really looking at the question of whether these Holocaust survivors and their heirs can haul the Hungarian government into a court here in the United States. Generally speaking, foreign sovereigns are immune from facing lawsuits in the US, and there are very limited exceptions. And so the plaintiffs in this case were arguing essentially that their case met one of those exceptions, and the Supreme Court, in its ruling today, which was unanimous, rejected that theory. So the plaintiffs' theory went a little bit like this. They called it a commingling theory. They said, during World War II, during the Holocaust, their property was stolen by the Hungarian government and the National Railway. At some point, those assets were liquidated, and then they were commingled into general government funds in the Hungarian treasury. So now, decades later, they've been trying to get compensation. But the Supreme Court's ruling really closes the door on their ability to do so in courts here in the United States. So if they want to keep trying, they'll have to seek relief in Hungarian courts or somewhere else.
All right, Zach Schonfeld, courts reporter at The Hill, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Bianca.
Canada clinched a 3-2 win against Team USA in an overtime Four Nations face-off hockey game in Boston on Thursday night. And Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau took a swipe at President Trump, clapping back at his calls for Canada's annexation as the 51st U.S. state. Trudeau wrote on X, quote, "You can't take our country and you can't take our game." The comments cap off a politically charged lead-up to the game. USA fans booed Canada's national anthem last night, following Canadian fans booing a Star-Spangled Banner performance in Montreal last week. Trump also posted on Truth Social Thursday, calling on Team USA to win against Canada and doubling down on his calls for Canada to merge with the U.S. Trump was not in attendance at the game, but called players before to wish them good luck. And there's a new app in town. Protector is being called the new Uber with Guns app that lets you hire armed bodyguards on demand. News Nation's Nancy Liu has the details on this new private security service for the public.
Well, the newest company offering so-called Uber with Guns service is called Protector, and Protector's CEO claims the app can save lives. Protector offers armed security guards on demand, along with luxury transportation, with either military or law enforcement veterans behind the wheel or next to clients, ready to protect and open fire if necessary. The app currently offers services in Los Angeles and New York, and Protector CEO points to the likely life-saving alternate scenarios had armed security been with United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson back in December.
What we hope to achieve with Protector is to make a more accessible way where people can, book, personal protection for themselves if they're visiting an unfamiliar city, as simple as just going on the app and booking it. Or you get a dedicated protector that's either an active duty or recently retired law enforcement or military. And in addition to that, you also get a dedicated black car driver that is either a Suburban or an Escalade.
Another company drawing attention as an Uber with Guns service is Black Wolf. This rideshare app debuted last year, providing transportation in 11 U.S. cities with armed drivers behind the wheel, starting at a base fare of $60. For now, Protector is a minimum booking of 5 hours for $1,000. While armed security is already a staple with executives and the rich and famous, private disputes and online threats have opened a whole new market for the convenience of on-demand protection through an app. Back to you.
News Nation's Nancy Liu, thank you so much. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Bianca Facchinei. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel. And come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.